At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. This is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington, and this campaign, we're coming to get our check.
Good morning, my fellow co-host. How are you this morning?
Good morning.
Good morning. I thought it was, thank you, Robby, for sharing that with us. You know, we're always, you know, bringing some truth to the light. So thank you, Robby, for sharing that this morning. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Tamara and Robby.
Good morning.
That was deep, right, David?
What's that?
I said that was deep, that speech from Martin Luther King. It's still Black, you know, yesterday was the end of Black History Month, but we're still celebrating. We're still talking about those things that have made this country what it is. So, you know, we're still talking about it. Did you, have you heard that speech by Dr. King?
No, that was really interesting, and it resonates with me for a lot of reasons about the Homestead Act of 1862, which preceded the Emancipation Proclamation and gave whites, supposedly gave whites free land in the West. The failure of the Southern Homestead Act after the Civil War, which blocked former slaves, you know, free persons from getting the same rights, even though they supposedly had them, you know, as citizens now, and the Great Exodus, the Negro Exodus of 1879, which was an attempt by several 100,000 African Americans to move out west to get free land as citizens, and they were blocked by armed gangs at the Mississippi. So there, and on top of that is the whole history of how Black farmers could not get land in the South, in particular, and how the farm lending bureaus of the New Deal refused to lend money to Black farmers. So and that went up to the 1990s, when the remaining Black farmers sued for racial discrimination in the agricultural, the Federal Agricultural Administration. FAA discriminated against Blacks, were controlled by by the white power elite. And they got a multi-billion-dollar settlement, which the Republicans tried to block. So this is a long history, and King was really very right to focus on the role that mechanization played in driving Black people off the land in the 1950s and 60s. So the federal government was essentially subsidizing the elimination of Black farmers because they did not own the land. Big story, very, very important story, very important for understanding the need for reparations and other issues like that, and also for how we are going to renew the land and to address the issue of climate change. because small farmers are the ones who are going to make that change. And there are very, very few Black small farmers that are left. We need to face and address the racial discrimination of agriculture in agriculture over several centuries.
Wow.
Keep going on. I mean,
David, this is good stuff this morning. Robby, she sent this video over and this clip, and I thought you needed to hear it. That's where we are in this country. I actually had a conversation on this past Tuesday. There's a movement happening, and it's, I had been seeing this hashtag ADOS all across, all across social media, and I didn't know what it was. So I reached out. There's an activist out in Sacramento. His name is Chris Lodson. And he and I had a very candid conversation about what this ADOS movement, and it's the American Descendants of Slavery. He had to correct me because I had it all wrong. I didn't know what it was. It hadn't reached this side of America yet. But this is where they're asking for some sort of reparations. This is where, candidates are being called to the carpet. Cory Booker, Kamala Harris were both on the Breakfast Club. It's a very urban broadcast out of New York, and neither of them could answer the question about reparations. They both danced around it. Cory Booker actually said something to the effect of what was best for Black people is American aggressive, and it was just the way he said it, and it was just, I'm butchering it right now, but the way he said it, he just danced all around it. And if candidates and these elected officials aren't doing anything for Black and brown people, particularly Black people, right now, because that's their push, the ADOS movement, I'm all in for it. If candidates and elected officials don't have an agenda that moves the ball and destroys all of these systems, I won't even say all of these systems, we're not going to vote for them. We will be, in my words, withholding the vote from a lot of these candidates.
To second, both of you really, and David, thank you for the historical context, because it really brings us to where we are today. There's a sister, a Southwest Atlanta resident. She's brilliant. Her name is Dara. She's a friend of mine, and Dara Cooper, and she works for an organization called Farming While Black, or an affiliate of an organization called Farming While Black. And the context that you gave, David, is exactly how we led up to this. And those same, those same policies or actions on behalf of our government in our country are pervasive throughout housing, as you said, with redlining. And, for those people who don't know, maybe somebody doesn't, redlining is when red lines were drawn on maps and lenders would not lend in those areas. And scare tactics were used in the real estate industry against people of color, specifically Black people. And when you layer you couldn't own land, you had to go this way, you didn't receive, fair treatment, Jim Crow laws, and then the redlining, and you reach today, it's truly an amazing feat to be a successful person of color. Did we lose Miss Tamara? Well, okay. I think the signal might be because when the weather's like this. Okay. Are we good?
Yeah, I have a frozen screen for her, but
okay. I wonder if it's still, but I guess we'll just keep going until she comes back.
Right.
But yeah, it definitely brings in the discussion of reparations. And to Tamara's credit, what she was describing about our politicians not being, on the forefront about it. Even Bernie Sanders was questioned about reparations. And I don't believe his answer was direct. I did hear Cory Booker's response, and I didn't know. I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't sure if he meant reparations are good for African Americans, but they're also good for the country as a whole to stabilize this inequity. Okay, I just got a message from Ms. Tamara. She said her connection's giving a little trouble and she wants us to keep going. So we'll just wait for her to come back. But at the end of the day, it's all about the history. And if we don't teach history in school, we can't come to a consensus because people don't really understand what happened.
Yeah, I think also that there really is a misunderstanding. There's kind of a zero-sum game that is part of the mentality that if black people get reparations, it's going to take something away from white people. And that's not necessarily the way that black people think, but it certainly is the way that people who think and act white think and act. There really is a sense there that there's a real misunderstanding of where European American working people's interests lie. And that seems to me, well, that's the role I'm trying to play is to make that clearer. Than if I just was reading some statistics, if there's a $15 minimum wage in the United States, it would increase the pay of to the living wage level of 38% of black people, but also of 25% of whites, and that indicates how great the pay differential is. But 25% of white workers is millions and millions of people, So we have a disproportionate number of low wage workers among people of color, black and other people of color, but we still have millions and millions of European Americans who are in that same category.
And I think where you're going with this, welcome back, Ms. Tamara. I think where you're going with this, David, is that people who are thinking white and acting white, as you say, are working against their own interests. Yeah. And I think even Cory Booker, to some degree, I don't know, I'd like to think he was saying this, inequity is harmful to everyone. Inequity and the lack of reparations to African Americans is harmful to the community collective, to the society as a whole. Mm-hmm. But your point, David, until we get straight about the history, meaning our schools, how do we come to terms? It's almost like talking to people who know half the argument.
I think that there really is a two-step. It's kind of like a high wire act, and it really requires us to think in a different way around race, to be able to hold both of those concepts at the same time. That there is tremendous inequality. And injustice and oppression that has been delivered to people of color. And in many cases, the people who are doing it, the perpetrators, are not the elites themselves. They are manipulating, those of us who are European American and below. And I keep saying this, that the dynamic that's set up is not between against our interests and for our interests. It's against our interests as whites or against our interests as working people. And unless the Cory Bookers of the world, of the Bernie Sanders of the world, are presenting that choice to whites, they are really not talking to folks, on their level. And by on their level, I mean where their thinking is. Where not that they're dumb or anything. It's that they're really put into this contradiction, and without a framework for making the choice in favor of their class interests as opposed to their race interests, the whole dynamic of segregation and the color line. And the fact that that people who think and act white are terrified of crossing the color line is not going to it's not going to happen. Now, on the other hand, there are tremendous forces that have been that working people in general and Black and Hispanic working people have put into motion that are making tremendous changes in that. They're forcing the integration of the workforce and the integration of education and all of these other things that are creating the possibility and the potential for white people who think and act white to be faced with first of all, competition for jobs, and then secondly, from people who are just clearly as good as they are, if not better.
So David, let me ask you, if you guys can hear me, let me ask you, is it the biggest factor fear? Is that why white America is so afraid of this whole reparations movement? The biggest factor is just fear?
No, I don't think it's only fear, but what's your thoughts, Robby?
Well, I actually, as you were chatting, and it reminded me of the situation in Atlanta, because I always kind of come back home to the nucleus, and it's so important to discuss everything and understand it all in the larger context. But really, right now, we have something very interesting happening in Atlanta. In Buckhead, our folks in Buckhead are up in arms against crime. Yeah. And predominantly, the people doing the crime, and I say this with great love and respect, are black youth, or black men. And at least that's the people who keep getting photographed in the media, unless that's manipulated, which is entirely possible. That being said, Buckhead obviously is predominantly white. And this goes to show that the inequity in areas where people of color live, in divested areas and poverty, will impact the community collective. Yeah. And that's the bottom line. And so now they are calling for enforcement. They had the mayor the mayor of Atlanta at a town hall in Buckhead. I think Ms. Tamara may have gone out. Is sitting there answering to the citizens of Buckhead, and as she should, But you have to wonder. One, we've had crime over in the Southwest side, on the South side, and they have the political power to do something about it, but their focus is on enforcement, and that's a shame, because the things that you're talking about from history, housing, land, farming, food deserts, jobs. If we had been equitable about all of these things, they would not have the consequences today. So when you say think and act white, it brings me back to, my feminist studies background, where there's an article, I believe it's Audre Lorde, and I could have the wrong writer, who says, you cannot pick who you are. You cannot pick, David, that you are a white Caucasian man. I cannot pick that I'm a light-skinned Latina who can pass. Miss Tamara cannot pick that she's an African-American woman. We can all pick our politics. Those people in Buckhead cannot pick that they're white, but they can pick their politics. And even, and this is going to be a little, coming from me probably saying it, but our elite Black folks can pick their politics too, because some of our elite Black folks are calling for enforcement just like Buckhead. And they are not asking for holistic development. They are not supporting reparations, which coincide with community benefits agreement and public-private partnerships. And because these divested areas have suffered divestment and gone through this historical context, it is entirely appropriate that public-private partnerships assist and build them out with the community collective in mind. And I'm on a soapbox about it, and I'm going to tighten up right now. About it, because I posted something on my page about Atlanta Bike Life, who are nonviolent urban youth who are asking for a bike park, an in-town ATV bike park. They don't have anywhere legal to ride. People want them off the streets. They're getting arrested. They're dying on the streets. We're having a fight between the police and our Black youth. We're trying to keep them out of gangs. We don't want them committing crimes, but we open a soccer park or a skateboard park or a dog park, and we won't give them what they want. And even Robby, say that again. Say that again. You'll open all these other parks, a dog park, but you won't open a bike park. An ATV dirt park for Black urban youth. And sadly, even Black men on my page are coming and saying they should pay for it. When how are they going to pay for it? Based on everything we just talked about. They have a nonviolent movement called Bikes Up, Guns Down. We don't want these folks committing crimes. They keep the kids out of gangs. They're cool. They're entrepreneurial. They're artists. What are we doing? It's nonsensical. And to both, when you ask David why do people do that? And he, is it fear? David, you said you don't think so. So what is it then?
Well, I think it's it's a combination. I would say of the whole institutional nexus that has created this the separate and unequal society and keeps it in place.
David, God forgive me. Speak English. An institutional nexus. What does that mean to normal people?
It means that every institution in the United States, from the education system to the transportation to bank loans to everything else, is created as in a separate and unequal mode. So that a good example is the opening of mortgage lending, which was cut off to Black people for decades and decades and decades after World War II by the GI Bill and other discriminatory. When they opened up the access to mortgages for people of color, not just for people of color, but when they loosened the requirements for mortgages, they created a second tier level of mortgages, subprime mortgages, and that meant that people of color who took out those mortgages were much more likely to not be able to meet their obligations.
They were predatory in the construction of it.
Yeah. So that's the kind of thing that exists. Now, there's another aspect to it. The other side of it is that we have to assume responsibility and blame, for that. By we, I mean progressives. But when progressive people fail to go out and talk to European Americans and challenge their thinking and acting white, they leave the field for the Trumps, for the Republicans and the Trumps. Mm-hmm. And there's nobody out there who is countering. Well, there's not nobody, but there isn't an intentional, massive, organized and intentional movement on the part of progressives and I mean this Black and white, although, obviously much more white progressives are responsible than
David, because folks out there are probably not going to listen to Black progressives. So it's not.
Well, I'm saying, yeah, there are plenty of people who will. I mean, it's true that there are areas, there are plenty of places around among European Americans who are so isolated and so cut off from the African American community that they have no conversation at all. But there's also a heck of a lot of European Americans today who have mixed race families now. There are millions of people who are mixed race. There are.
I don't know that those people are the ones that we're going to win over, David. Let me say this.
Of the white people in this country, there are white people in this country who have Black grandchildren, or half Black grandchildren.
And I really think, though, honestly, that this is something that when you say we progressives, it's true because we have to support. But we progressives that can pass, and more importantly, you progressives will be more successful at that. And let me explain why.
Yes, I agree.
I step into a circle, and if people think I'm white and I'm well behaved and say what they like, everything is fine. Yeah. When I step out of my lane and say something about equity or the things that I talk about, I am no longer welcomed in that group. I am no longer an okay token. And so that's why it's important that people who truly can say, no, who can stay and kind of engage in that manner, because it's not effective with other folks. I've seen that. Yeah. And I think what you were saying to your other point is that they're living in a silo. They're living in almost a different world to some degree. Yeah. There's a German word with the horses when they're wearing these blinders. Yes. We don't have that word in English. It's interesting. There's no word in English that means it, but it reminds me of what you're talking about. It's like impossible for them to see it to some degree. So I'm kind of concerned because I think that as progressives, we have the illusion of organization and government and structure, but it's not actual. It's not factual. So, because we don't have the things in place for oversight. We don't. We've been all living on borrowed money at interest. That's the reality. And now they're coming to a head.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, Robby. I do think you're right about the horse blinders. That is precisely the way that I mean, if you wanted to draw the analogy out, European Americans who think and act white not only have horse blinders on, but they've got a carrot being dangled in front of them. And the carrot is, for the most part, is out of reach. Occasionally, they get to eat the carrot. The
privilege. The privilege you're talking about. Yes, that makes.
But you can't lose sight of the fact that they're draft horses. They're pulling the elite's goods for them. So
that's a great way to say it.
That's I think the issue that we really need to work with people on. And you're absolutely right. I agree with you that European American progressives are the ones who have to do the heavy lifting there, but they also have to do that. That's too abstract. We have to really find ways of cogently talking to people about their interests, which don't deny the fact that they have privilege, right? It's got to be both. It's got to have both parts to it.
But that's where I'm lost, because see, it's in Buckhead's interest to allow a community-driven plan in Southwest Atlanta and the South Side, again, to bring it home, to sustain the region so that our youth, our kids, our uncles who were arrested during mass incarceration don't go commit a slider crime.
Yeah.
And instead, they're stuck on you shouldn't commit crime.
Yeah. And the thing is that same mentality, I think, really drives people who are in this anti-immigrant camp. They see, I mean, if you listen to I mean, I don't talk to those folks very much, but if you listen to the interviews, they're saying these people have come here illegally. They're breaking the law, right? As if there aren't millions of other people who are breaking the law on pretty much the same level. Anybody who's run a light, anybody these are misdemeanors that they've created. They want the death penalty for folks who have committed a minor infraction, and so why do they generate that kind of hysteria? Well, partly it's because of their of the way that the news that they listen to and how they're ginned up. They're made. The Fox News and all of these outlets are able to generate this kind of hysteria, but it's also really lack of self-awareness, lack of humility. Yeah. And if it is up to people like me, white working people, to call them out on it. And
I also think that us as people of color, who have privilege, class privilege, we should not be supporting full enforcement alone.
Yeah, that's exactly what I.
Yeah. And as advocates, we should be a united front, not in one silo over here, and one silo over here, and one silo over here. The Atlanta airport is a good example of this. And I really, because I see a lot of folks in my neighborhood who are privileged, affluent Black people calling for enforcement too.
Yes.
So I'm very happy about, the development and not standing up for poor folks and the poor Black people at that. Yeah. The airport is a good example. Now the state wants to take over the airport. And I recently saw an article from Andre Dickens, our city at-large council person. And he put out a post, and he's saying that the state wants to steal a city asset and that it's run so well. But if it was run so well, why do we have people like Bette Avery on the show last week who have been fired for union organizing for poor labor and lack of benefits and, toxic work conditions.
Yeah.
So we're going to come back to this conversation. We have our guest on that has arrived, Mr. Bobby Rodrigo. Good morning.
How are everybody?
Good morning. Good morning. I don't know what you're doing, but we see you traveling along somewhere.
Yeah, I'm on I-75 heading south. Dealing with my normal chaos in my world, and I'm sorry that I wasn't here at the beginning, but trying to log in while we're driving is quite interesting. I have to tell you that, but not impossible. And I'm happy
I
to be
think
here.
you're driving dirty.
He's got his phone up on the mantle, probably mounted, looking at himself.
I don't think this is allowed, but okay.
Yeah, so please allow me, not to have eye contact some of the time, because I do want to stay in between the lines.
So let me introduce Mr. Bobby Rodrigo. I met him along the way on the campaign trail when I was running for the Georgia State Senate. And he talked a lot about marijuana, and I asked him to come on today to give us an update on what's happening with marijuana legislation, what kind of movements are still going on. Like, where are we in the world of marijuana and cannabis, Mr. Bobby?
Well, it's a cesspool like many things in our society. Unfortunately, prohibition is one of the bad things in our history. Cannabis prohibition, particularly the way that it's hurt the minorities and the poor particularly. But putting that aside for the moment, we had a couple of major things happen, and then there's a lot of misunderstandings going on, and then there's a lot of states moving in various directions, so there's a lot of confusion. So starting with, most people heard about the hemp portion of the Farm Bill. That was advertised pretty heavily across the media world and the elected officials. So essentially, people believe that the Farm Bill basically, many ways that it did, but while this happened, there are states that are implementing laws that still keep it illegal, whether or not it falls within the confines of the 10th Amendment depends upon what they're writing. Most of the time, they don't pay attention to that. In the state of Idaho, for example, there was a legal transport of hemp products on a truck going across state lines, and a police agency in a county in Idaho pulled them over and arrested everybody, even though they had all their paperwork in order and everything was proper and everything was filed properly. They still arrested them, and the last report that I saw while this was happening is they were in jail for 4 days and the stuff was confiscated. Legalization has been quite interesting. Los Angeles has a backlog of applications for people who have already set up shops, and they're losing their businesses because the licensing process is taking so long. On the plus side, I only see negative, of course. On the plus side, obviously there's steps being done forward relative, particularly with the medical aspects of it and CBD. There's enough CBD stores open in Georgia, for example. What's interesting about Georgia is Georgia, you're not allowed to grow hemp, but you're allowed to have it. Every state that touches Georgia on the border allowed to grow it. And of course, there's a medical marijuana program in Georgia that has certain ailments that are allowed to receive a card, but you have no place to buy it in Georgia. And of course, you would be violating at least federal law if you are transporting it across. Marijuana in one of the best ways the movement believes, as far as the way the laws that were implemented, how they have done proper regulations as far as the product quality, but they've made it very easy for people to get licensing. Recently, San Francisco just purged about 9,000, I believe it was 9,000, might have been 90,000, but the thousands of misdemeanor and possession convictions of cannabis, and that's been happening a lot. Seattle did it, Oregon has done it, or at least Portland has. It also happened, I believe, in Maryland. It was happening in Maryland as well, and a number of other places, and that is a major impact as well. And then there has been the battles, of course, that exist relative to minorities and the people who have been impacted negatively, mostly negatively, by the. They're now, of course, the proper battle to allow those people to have access, because a lot of the laws that were implemented, of course, wouldn't allow anybody who had ever been convicted of cannabis possession to have a cannabis license. So that's one of the reasons why this purge is so important, and one of the reasons why there's a number of movements going on. Michigan is implementing. There's starting to be a lot of cannabis education, but we still have the problems with research, because while you see media reports and reports coming out about research, most of it is done by surveys and questionnaires. The University of Mississippi is the only research facility that is likely to have cannabis in their possession to actually research it chemically, from that, from the standpoint of what the product actually is in this country. And only 18% of the medical institutions even teach anyone what the endocannabinoid system is, and that has nothing to do with cannabis. That has to do with a system that is inside our bodies. So there's all these factors going on, and basically the criminalization has happened in, I believe, now 14 cities in the state of Georgia, which is wonderful. There's the advocacy in the state of Georgia, for example, is marvelous. Tom McCain, Sharon Rayford, Ebony Knight, so many others, James Miser, and I can go on and on. Stanley Atkins has done some great things recently. He's got a Minorities for Medical Cannabis. He's been involved in it greatly. Any of these people, if you're in Georgia, join on, find out what's going on, ask the questions, learn. I promise you, when you learn actually what's really happening, that your views on it, if you have negative views about it, may change, may not. Choice is a big deal. And again, I'm not trying to be negative. Progress is happening without a doubt. I hate prohibition, and it was never a real thing, and it literally was done to stamp out minorities, and literally was done to stamp out the peace movement. And we all know that for a fact now, because all those papers have been specified. So I have a harsh view on that aspect of it, and I'm a liberty guy, as you know, Tamara, and I want people to be able to do what they want to do as long as they're not harming anybody else. So that's kind of where my stance is on prohibition, and I'm hoping that we continue to move forward, and I support anybody who wants to help us do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bobby, for coming on and giving us an update. Like I said, I met Bobby along the way. Pushing Normal is an organization. I think that's where that's where I really learned a lot about marijuana reform, and how important this movement is to people, to the lives of people who have been incarcerated behind these marijuana convictions. And America needs to right their wrong, and particularly here in Georgia, we need to fix this immediately. So, Bobby, I want to thank you for coming on. We definitely want to have you back in the future, but we want you to be stationary the next time you come on.
I will. I have to say one thing to everybody about Tamara. I'm a fierce advocate, and I can tell you that I always support anybody and any organization and people who are actually out there fighting for the people. And I have to tell you, knowing Tamara personally, that's what she does. And if you have different political views, it doesn't matter, because she's actually talking to everyone, and her constituents, when she's always appreciated that about her.
Oh, thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Bobby. We'll definitely have you back. Definitely keep us updated on what's going on, or anything you feel like we need to know. We'll definitely have you back, okay?
Fantastic. Everybody have a fantastic day, and I promise to be stationary next time.
Thank you.
I think it's. I think there's a synergy or convergence that we ought to think about, which is the whole movement to ban the box. On job applications. About convictions. There's more than just marijuana. Legalization and what do you call it? Erasing. The criminal records for marijuana crimes. There's a lot of other convictions that ought to be not necessarily erased, but not have people have to put that up front, which becomes a basis for eliminating them from consideration for jobs in general. So that's really important. In fact, one of the things I was thinking about, we don't have really time to go through the whole Green New Deal, proposal that's been made to Congress. But the House resolution that's come up that has Senator Markey on the Senate side, or not the House resolution, but the resolution on the Green New Deal with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the House side. We really should be studying that proposal for legislation. It's not specific yet, but one of the things that I really think it misses is the whole idea of ban the box, to have access to jobs in the green economy, not be dependent upon upon having people have to put up front convictions for crimes. If they do, what happens then is that the hiring system is going to have a built-in discrimination, because we know for almost 10 years from Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, that this is the way that the Jim Crow system, the new Jim Crow system, operates. It's not on the basis of skin color; it's on the basis of who has been caught up in the criminal justice system. So. So those are things I think we really need to make some connections there, to be very intentional about how we go about making these massive changes that need to be made to keep the earth from being much less habitable for humans and other species. Not just us, but everybody. So that's I just a little bit of
Let's circle back to Robby with her question, David. Well, where you left off, Robby, before Bobby came on. Let's circle back to where you were.
Yeah, about the
That's the thing I love about this broadcast, is like, we don't, we go wherever it takes us. So Robby's like, I think we're gone from there now.
Were you I thought the points you were making about the airport were really good to make the case.
Well, I'm looking at my notes. I keep notes. Which I think everyone would be helpful. But in terms of what you just said, David, and to tie it back to Mr. Marin, I'm not sure if we're tying in exactly. And actually, let's tie in Bobby too. You just said, David, that Michelle Alexander, the new Jim Crow, basically mass incarceration, war on drugs, mass incarceration, and how who's affected today is, the criminal record, the ban the box, go to the ban the box. And you said, and I know what you meant, I want to tie into that it's not about race, but it's about the criminal record. But ironically, the criminal record was about race. And yeah. So, to some degree, and then obviously the poor, because, they can be jailed just the same, to make money off of. The white poor, to your point, European, what do you call it? I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. So we know that. And then ironically, what Bobby said was, this whole industry of medical marijuana, hemp, et cetera. We know that there's massive people who have been arrested on weed charges, right? Mm-hmm. And now, the industry, they're trying to get into this industry with this record, right? And that ties kind of back to bring that to Atlanta. Yes, we have, this airport, and the state is trying to take over the airport, and the city's now upset because it's a city asset. But if our elected officials in Atlanta, who are predominantly Black, okay, we have a Black-led city in Atlanta, not Georgia as a whole, or at least the illusion of it, would have held each other accountable instead of allowing crooked county contracts or doing the same things that the Good Old Boy Network does, meaning nepotism and favoritism, the state wouldn't have a reason, an excuse to come and try to take the airport. And what's irking me about it is that airport has massive employees, you know, and one of them, who's a global powerhouse, is defunding Clayton County schools, okay, is not paying their employees below wing, is, some people would argue, a toxic culture or discriminatory. And yet we still have elected officials saying that the airport operation is great. And it's an illusion. I mean, in my opinion, it's an illusion of great. And I have to wonder, you know, I was speaking to one of the union reps or people trying to get a union the other day, and they told me that our city council didn't know that the subcontractors below wing make pitiful wage. They didn't know, they didn't have medical. And it goes back to, you know, again, my neighbors who have privilege, a class privilege, who might be Black and who are influential, who are also our elected officials because they get put into office. When you're driving in your fancy car to your fancy job in your fancy position, wearing your fancy suit, where are you driving by? Like, are you looking under these bridges? Are you seeing the state of the streets and the lack of cover on streetscapes, you know, in public transportation? I live in a community that didn't have an elevator for 15 years. And the saddest part is when our gentrifiers came, they argued about the elevator and they got something done and they stuck a Black face in front of it saying, look, these poor people didn't have an elevator, but really they want the elevator. While the poor Black people are getting pushed out. And to sum it all up, this is systemic. We have a systemic issue in Atlanta. It has to do with the civic engagement, the NPU structure. Apparently they're looking at it now, which is great. However, if you look at it with the illusion of looking at it, because that's what's happening, and we don't really dismantle it and we don't allow solutions that are comprehensive. If we have a systemic problem, we need a systemic solution-oriented, a solution that is systemic, meaning it ties into everything. The housing, the infrastructure, the jobs, the protections, and they're not allowing that. I'm listening to Bobby Rodrigo, and we had this large-scale comprehensive plan at the NPU level blocked for politics that no other leader would stand up to in Atlanta. Give me one sec. And then we have a component of it in Milan. It's a 500-bed facility where they can grow hemp, and nobody even knows about it. That's
well, it's systemic, Robby, and it's because racism still exists in this country. Like, I think we just need to be lay it on the table. Like, these systems, when we used, who remember the man that used to be on our broadcast, David? John Armwood. And I used to fight with John, and I'll have to have a conversation with him. He used to always say that racism is permanent. Racism is permanent. I'm like, John, no, I have to believe, I have to have some hope. But these systems have been set up in a way where we cannot win as Black people, Black and brown people, as minority people. We can't win because racism still is alive and well in this country, and they don't want to see minorities get ahead, period.
Okay. I mean, I don't know.
I know.
I wouldn't disagree.
As Black and as brown as I am, I know.
No, I don't know. I'd like to believe, because I see I agree with you that it's systemic, no doubt. But I also see people like David, and I see people sometimes even in Buckhead commenting how they're in the minority, you know, but they're commenting how we do have to do something about this divestment.
You have to do it. You people that are lighter than me, you have to do it.
I agree.
We've always said that these problems exist. I think social media has totally helped us because now people can see. I think everybody, I saw trending this week, the man who was at the dog park. And his dog, I'm not sure if you saw this, Robby or David, but his dog humped the other lady's dog in a dog park, and she called the cops on him. It's like now that the world, everything is on video, we can, you know, live cast and everything, everybody can see everything. Now people are seeing it, and they, you know, you can't deny it, but it's here. It's the fabric of America. Racism is real. Go ahead, Robby.
No, you're right. What I'm having such trouble with is when people of color take on that role to lead a charge for enforcement or don't call out their friends who are crooked, how do we sort through that?
We can't. Black and brown people, you see how quiet I sit sometimes, because I know sometimes it's like, you know what? Black and brown people, we need to fix our own communities. We need to work on ourselves. We need to build our own.
We all live together. Like what happened with the lack of investment in Southwest Atlanta affects Buckhead just the same. The lack of equitable investment affects South Georgia just the same. So help me understand. Talk to me like I'm stupid.
We're gonna bring Egberto on. He's here with our national political update. Egberto, good morning.
Hey, how is everybody doing today?
Hi, Egberto.
Hi, Robby, David, Tamara For Georgia. How you guys doing this morning?
Good morning, Egberto. What's going on across this nation?
Oh, we have some great things happening. Yesterday the stock market gave us a bit of an indication that they are concerned that Medicare for All is actually going to make it. All the healthcare stocks fell. The market is usually a great indicator of where things are headed. So they are really thinking that people are really going to move some step forward. We're not necessarily saying that we're going to absolutely get what's going on right now for Medicare for All, but they're indicating that just maybe something is going to happen. So we'll see. On a second item, there was a great debate between Krugman, sort of a virtual debate between Krugman and the first daughter, who went on national TV and said people don't want to be given anything. And she's partially right. People don't want to be given anything, but everybody wants the same opportunity and everybody wants access to success. And right now we don't have an economy that gives everybody access to success. So what Krugman went ahead and displayed in great detail is that the only way everybody has access to success, access to a future, is what we've been preaching with. What's that word again, Robby? That word is democratic socialism. And he proved that when you looked at the states and Norway and Switzerland and Denmark and all these places, their upward mobility is so much larger, so much more so than in the United States. So everything these people are trying to do to scare Americans into believing that a change in our economic form would be disastrous. We have examples around the world that show us otherwise. And the great news about that is that was my blog for 5 o'clock this morning, and it just took off. So America is starting to love it.
Well, that is awesome, Egberto. So can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So I think there's a delay. We've had such awful connection this morning. I think this younger generation, like Robby asked you the last time you were on the broadcast to explain this democratic socialism and kind of break it down. This younger generation, they're receptive, they're open, they don't equate socialism to communism. So I just think it's just we're moving in the right direction in this country, where people are, not being held by our past. Like I'm excited about this younger generation.
I am as well. Now, I want to add something to the discussion that I heard earlier on between Robby, you, and David when it came to some racial issues. I think it is a bait and switch thing that's going on right now, in which the people of color are the pawns, and the way they become the pawns are as follows. It's not the people that are getting screwed in this country are everybody. Doesn't matter if it's people of color or white people or whoever. Everybody's getting screwed. But the way the plutocracy is using the people of color is they're using the intrinsic racism of people to go ahead and say, hey, don't look at what we are doing to make your life in Appalachia more difficult, to make your life in all these to make white people's lives in all these other locations difficult. They're saying, don't look at us, the plutocrats at the top that's causing your problem. Look at those brown people. Look at those black people. That's the root of your problem. And it's a bait and switch to put people against each other so that they don't look at who's really generating the problem, in my humble opinion.
I wouldn't disagree with that, Egberto.
Okay.
I wouldn't disagree, but I just think there's variations of getting screwed.
Mhm.
Because, you know, you can live in Buckhead in a really nice house with a really nice car with a really nice salary. And yeah, you have crime now, you know, but you ignored the divestment on the South Side until it literally showed up at your front door.
I am with you. I don't think we're disagreeing at all. I
Yeah.
am with you there.
And the part about, you know, all getting sucked into this system that is, you know, have different levels of penalties to some degree, when people cooperate with that system, they are complicit. Does that make sense? If I'm a politician and I go and I allow myself to be used and I cooperate until I'm no longer useful, and then I get thrown out like the trash when they want to come for the contracts, you know, don't stand up for something.
Robby, I agree with you so much. And here's the deal: you mentioned about that person living on the other side of Atlanta, who you know, he's bought into the system. The example that I gave a few shows ago was Bob Johnson from BET, who went on CNBC and sounded like any other plutocrat. And you know who Bob Johnson is, so that's my point.
Mhm.
So I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, and I'm so concerned because when I see people who are leaders, who are people of color in our community, calling for enforcement instead of not without the support of lower income, you know, uplifting, empowerment, you know, access to resources and jobs and training with housing models so that it's actually sustainable, that terrifies me. Because your behavior in essence is allowing another force to come even higher because they see you on the forefront.
Yes, yes, and yes. And I think that is where I don't know if you see it, but that is where we're actually in.
In what?
That says is that it goes beyond race, because when you have those leaders in Atlanta that are supporting those issues that you are talking about, you would think that they would look at the other side of the community that you spoke about earlier.
Mhm. Yeah, we've been having a very bad connection all morning. So Egberto, we want to thank you. You're kind of fading in and fading out. Egberto is he gives us a national political update with Politics Done Right. Follow him on politicsdoneright.com. Go on, support his broadcast. He's doing great work nationally to make sure that we all get this thing right. So thank you, Egberto. I'm sorry that our broadcast was failing us this morning. Robby.
Nothing. I mean, really, I guess I'm a little disenchanted lately, so I'm sorry if I sound negative, but I am very worried. I'm very concerned as a citizen. I see people fighting hard for people in you know, wrongfully locked up for years, and our advocacies are fighting for them. And now we're fighting for more enforcement in Buckhead, which means we're going to have more people locked up. And Buckhead is arguing for the judges to hold people in jail. And I'm terrified that we're just going to lock everybody up and make them have a bad record and gentrify Southwest Atlanta under the illusion of, you know, Atlanta United. While selfies
sounds like a master plan, Robby, and it sounds like their plan is working as planned.
But who's behaving in this? You see?
This is where we go back to David, with white people thinking and acting white and believing that the things that they do benefit them when actually they don't. Right, David?
Well,
Am I somewhere in the ballpark?
I would say to Robby that that those gentrifier, African American elite folks, they're also thinking and acting white. It's that they're actually look, there are really two. I don't necessarily think that the focus should be on socialism. The focus really needs to be on class struggle. That there really are power relations that we're talking about, and the more we think about power relations, the more we think about how we put together as I keep saying, the power with the solidarity definition of power, the more likely it is that those middle class forces are going to be willing to or be forced to pay attention to poor people. But it's got to start out with the power relations, with the solidarity power of the working people, and that's really where almost everybody is having the hardest time, is to figure out how to do that.
And that's where we're going to start next week, David. I think that's a great topic for us to lead into. This conversation today was phenomenal. I want to thank you guys. We're at the top of the hour. This was great. We never have enough time. I am Tamara Johnson-Shealy. You can find me on the broadcast and get more information. We have a Patreon button. We're asking those of you that are watching to go on and support us. Go to tamaraforgeorgia.com. Click on that Patreon button and support us. We're asking for very, very, very small contributions to help us build this broadcast. We have a vision for taking this thing big, on the road around Georgia and getting some better technology. You can see we kind of fade in and fade out. We have a lot of issues with our technology, but we want to build this broadcast. We want to build this platform. So go to our website, Tamara for Georgia. We're asking that you become a patron and make a monthly contribution. $1.90, $2, $5, whatever you can do to help us, we would greatly appreciate it. Again, go to the website, tamaraforgeorgia.com. Click on that Patreon button and be a sponsor of our broadcast and help us build it, continue to spread the word right here around Georgia. You can find Egberto at Politics Done Right. He's, like I said, national with a national political perspective. His website is politicsdoneright.com. You can always find David talking about race, racism, and race relations on Acknowledge the Divide right here on Facebook. And Miss Robby, you can always find her at the NPU Resident Public Forum right here on Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Have a great week.
Have a great week.
See you next Friday.
Bye-bye.